Tonight I'll tell you a story about a small-town gas station, the kind of place that smells faintly of motor oil and burnt coffee at all hours. The kind of place with a flickering fluorescent sign that refuses to die no matter how many storms roll through. It's a place where everyone knows the name on the business license and the hours that are painted on the glass. But there's one last night shift that nobody quite forgets. A night that left a recorder sitting on a dusty counter, a tape inside it, and a warning scrawled on the cassette. Shift number 74. Do not play after midnight. You don't need a map to get lost in a small town at 2 in the morning. The darkness is already its own winding road. You only need to be alone, to be the only heartbeat in a building where every clock seems to take its time. That was Mark's job, graveyard shift, all the creaks and hums while the town slept. He worked the lonely hours, the kind of job that teaches a person to notice small things. Missing gum from a rack, the way a jar never quite sits straight on a shelf, the way a fluorescent light buzzes with a different rhythm when something's off. On a thin October night, well past midnight, Mark turned on a handheld recorder. He spoke into it not to tell anyone a story, but because something in the station had been wrong for days and he wanted to leave a trace. He noted the date, the time past midnight, the hum of the lights, details that anchored memory like nails. He explained, exhausted, the cameras had been behaving oddly, motion detectors tripped without cause, and there was a knocking sound that came from inside the freezer room. The knocking wasn't the kind you expect from a weathered door or a loose sign. It came from the cold heart of the station, where boxes of frozen goods stood in a metal-coated hush. Mark had heard it the previous nights too, always between midnight and 1. It was a steady rhythm, like someone learning how to count on their knuckles. 3 raps, quiet space, 3 again. Those thin knocks threaded themselves into the silence of the place and made the hum of the fluorescent lights feel suddenly like a living thing. That night, after the knocks began again, Mark followed the sound. You could hear his boots on the linoleum through the microphone, heavy, routine steps that betrayed a man who had walked this path many times. He went to the cooler, to the tall freezer with a metal handle that protested when open. He pulled it open and the air that met him was a white, sharp thing, full of cold and the faint plastic scent of packaging. There was a metallic clatter, the kind of accidental noise that comes when stacked metal trays shift. Mark, for the recorder, described the sound and the silence that followed, the way the cold pressed at the back of his throat when he stood looking into the freezer and found nothing. The tape recorded everything, faithful and patient. But somewhere in that silence a whisper made itself present, delicate and jagged at once, and the recorder caught a voice that repeated the same 3 words over and over in a way that at first made no sense, as if language had been spun backwards by the tape itself. Mark reversed the audio and discovered the phrase plain as day, a plea, simple and impossible. "Let me out," the reversed recording revealed, and the air in the station seemed to tighten around that request. He checked the camera feeds next, because that's what you do when things go weird in a place full of screens. You look for an explanation in pixels and timestamps. The monitors were there, square and unblinking, each showing its piece of the station in monochrome detail. But something was wrong with what Mark saw. On one monitor he could see himself behind the counter, standing, turning, and holding the recorder. But the figure of him on screen didn't move with his body. It watched. It watched with an intensity that had nothing to do with the sleepy expression on Mark's real face. And then, bit by bit, that image in the grainy video became more than a still reflection. It leaned forward, not in the way people lean when they need to clean their glasses, but with a deliberate, unnatural tilt, and the face there smiled. Mark's real face didn't smile. The television Mark slid off the screen like a film being peeled away and walked, slowly, with an odd grace, toward the door. The cassette caught the staticky breath that comes right before terror, the squeak of a handle and the small, involuntary noise some people make when they discover a thing in themselves they cannot explain. Then the recording cut, abrupt like a lamp being snuffed. Metal clattered once more, and for a few seconds there was nothing but darkness pressed into the audio. After a small pause, a voice came into the microphone, close and intimate, the kind of voice that implies occupancy where there had been vacancy. It said, plainly and with a calm that made the tape colder, that the man whose shift it had been was gone and that it was now the other presence's shift. The rest of the tape unspooled into white noise, a wash of frequencies, but every few minutes the old knocking returned. 3 hits on an unseen surface, counted and patient. The police report after the disappearance made the place into a cold paragraph in a file. Officers entered the station at dawn and found the lights on and every camera feed looping the same 3-hour span, as if a watchful technician had set the building to replay a short film. When officers paused the footage at a certain time, 3:13 in the morning, they saw, near the freezer, a figure that didn't fit any human mold. Too tall, too elongated, but with an unmistakable attention, its head tilted to the side like someone listening to a faraway frequency. They photographed the frame and cataloged everything, but they found no fingerprints and no mark. Only the recorder, still running on the counter, its tape warm with the echoes of what had been said and unsaid. Years later, the station reopened under new ownership, and new faces replaced the old. The floor was swept, new slush freers were installed, and the coffee pot was replaced. The place had been brightened, repainted, scrubbed into a kind of brightness that suggested nothing terrible had ever happened there. Yet habits die hard, and none of the new nighttime workers lasted past midnight. The security system, a glossy modern thing with smart sensors and redundant backups, began to behave in a predictably unpredictable way. Every night, without fail, it would shut itself down at exactly 3:13 in the morning. Engineers called it a technical anomaly, perhaps a loop script or a busted firmware update. The staff called it a time that had teeth. People measure danger in many ways: distance, sound, the hours on a clock, and the staff learned not to push the measurement and see what would happen. There are a few things about this tale that matter beyond the shivers and the midnight knocks. First, the small-town station is a kind of stage for loneliness. It's a setting that makes the extraordinary look eerily believable. When the world shrinks to one person and one building, small disturbances loom large. A misplaced can, a flickering light, a camera that blinks, each becomes amplified until explanation runs out and imagination fills the space. Second, the tape itself acts like a time capsule. It captures not just events but the way fear settles into the body. The quick breath, the pause before a decision, the way a man places himself between a noise and the unknown. Listening to that kind of recording does something to a listener. It stitches urgency to memory. You imagine the cold, the metal, the fluorescent hum, and your own breath seems louder in response. Third, there's the human instinct to look at images for proof. Mark turned to the screens, to the monitors, because cameras are supposed to be faithful. But what happens when the camera shows you something you cannot explain, when your reflection refuses to obey you? That inversion is the edge of uncanny, the familiar that becomes foreign. It's where a sense of safety dissolves and leaves only the fragile belief that the world has rules. And those rules, sometimes, bend. Now imagine unpacking what "let me out" really implies. It's a simple sentence, a plea that conceals a dozen possibilities. Does it mean someone or something is trapped somewhere inside the station? Is it an echo of a previous presence, a memory wanting air? Or could it be something else, an inhabitant of the same dead hours that wears the station like a jacket, pressing always against the cold? The phrase, when reversed and heard the right way, becomes a hinge in the story. It turns a noise into intent. It turns the freezer from a box of frozen goods to a place of containment. The mind resists straightforward answers. It prefers to spin narratives. But the tape resists being pinned down, too. It offers pieces and refuses the rest, like a locked drawer that clinks when you jostle it but never yields its contents. Consider the timeline piece. The camera feed looping the same 3 hours is a detail that supplies both frustration and pattern. Time becoming circular on film suggests a mechanical failure, sure, but it also has a certain poetic sting. Those 3 hours become a trap you can watch but cannot enter or leave. When stopped at 3:13, the frame reveals a figure not quite human, a shape that is elongated, listening with its head at an odd angle. Why that time? Why that tilt? Numbers and gestures in stories like this feel like a secret language, someone calling our attention to something we are supposed to notice but cannot translate. People are drawn to patterns. A repeated time can become a superstition, and superstition can become a rule. The new team's security system shutting off at 3:13 every night is a curious and unnerving echo of the paused frame. Machines are stubbornly literal. The same process repeating suggests an outside influence, or a stubborn internal defect that refuses all fixes. Technicians came, guessed at software bugs, rolled back updates, replaced cameras and cables, and still, precisely at 3:13, the system went black. The station's lights remained on. The coffee machine kept humming. Only the watchful eyes of the cameras went blind. There are practical explanations, of course. Power surges, humidity causing short circuits, eroded wiring. Yet explanations often fall short in the presence of the recorded plea and the photograph of a shape that is not quite human. Practicality and possibility collide in the vestibule between skepticism and wonder. Now think of Mark, alone on those long nights. You can imagine him in detail, a man with a careful routine. He makes coffee, checks the aisles, counts the cash drawer, and listens for the kinds of sounds that mean trouble. The hiss of an engine, the clink of a bottle, the sound of a tired car door slamming in a parking lot that's nearly empty. Working alone all night trains you to be the house's sentry. Small noises are supposed to follow rules. They are supposed to belong to doors and plumbing and dripping pipes. When they do not, a person who stays becomes a witness to the boundary where ordinary life ends and something stranger begins. And because this is a story about things caught on tape and not things spoken face to face, there is power in proximity. The whisper that is close to the microphone after the recorder fell is not just audio, it is presence. It tells you that whatever took the shift did not need to enter a room. It was already at the steel counter, breathing the same air as the magnets on the fridge and the gum rack. The notion of an entity taking someone's shift turns the idea of work into a sort of currency. We trade hours of attention for safety, for wages, for a monitored space. But what if those hours could be occupied by someone else? Something that goes about the movements of a job without the warmth of a human. Then work becomes a ritual that masks substitution. That is the chill in this story. Not only that a man disappeared, but that something settled in to occupy the routine in his stead. That is the image the tape leaves us. A presence that does not laugh or speak in the human way, but that knows how to wear a shift and how to be there. Finally, there is a cautionary edge to all of this. Less about ghosts or glitches and more about paying attention to the small alarms of life. When alone at night, the body's sense of reality flexes like a muscle. It can stretch to reach for explanations or it can contract into fear. The recorded tape is a reminder that the ordinary is precious and fragile and that the things we rely on, cameras, security systems, fluorescent lights, are not absolute. They are tools that can be fooled, bent, and sometimes turned against the people who count on them. So what should you do if you ever find yourself in a situation like Mark's? Pay attention to the small things, the rhythm of lights, the way doors sit, the sounds that repeat. Record what you notice in a way that leaves a trace, not because you expect rescue, but because memory needs anchors. Don't assume that screens always tell the truth. They render a version of reality, sometimes a broken and treacherous one. Finally, be gentle with your imagination. It will fill the gaps, and sometimes that fills them with things you wish weren't there. The station remains in the town as a place with a name on a sign and a story in people's mouths. We tell it in bars and parking lots and late-night message boards, where someone always swears they once saw a camera blink or a light buzz and go out. The tape itself sits on a counter in a box of forgotten things, a plastic cassette in a drawer waiting for someone reckless enough to press play. The old warning label is still taped over it. Do not play after midnight. The last job the gas station could do, for us, is to teach a simple thing about timing. There are hours that belong to us, and there are hours that, for reasons we do not fully understand, feel like someone else's. On certain nights, the town's wind sounds like a hand along the edge of a metal roof. The fluorescent sign, even if fixed, keeps its flicker in the mind like a stutter. If you ever find yourself working alone and your equipment starts lying to you, remember Mark's recorder, listen for the 3 knocks, and consider whether the shape in the grainy monitor is really you. If you are tempted to play a tape with a label that warns you away, weigh the comfort of curiosity against the cost of knowing. In the end, this is a story about quiet places and about the ways the world can shift when no one else is watching. It does not offer closure, only a pulse, markers of time and memory, cameras that loop, a freezer that hides things, and a single recorded voice that tried to leave a breadcrumb for anyone willing to hear. So keep your light on if you work the night shift. Keep your eyes on what belongs to you and on the little details that will tell a different tale when they change. And if you ever hear 3 soft knocks from a place where nothing should be, treat them as a signal. Pay attention, back away, and do not, under any circumstance, play a tape that is labeled with a warning meant to be obeyed. Good night. And if the town is quiet around you, remember that being alone is not the same as being lonely. In some rooms, being alone is a place where things find their way in.